Today, the President and First Lady test positive for COVID-19, and a massive effort is underway to quarantine and test the highest level officials and advisors in the country. Plus, the coronavirus test that the White House uses may not be the most accurate test on the market. And finally, a disappointing jobs report caps off a week of tens of thousands of corporate layoff announcements. I'm MacKenzie Sigalos, and this is CNBC After Hours. Stocks dropped today after news broke in the middle of the night that President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump tested positive for COVID-19. They're both quarantining and experiencing mild symptoms. The president himself currently has a low-grade fever, according to 3 people familiar with the situation. And the White House physician just disclosed this afternoon that Trump has received an antibody cocktail therapy that is not an approved drug for treating COVID-19. Now, this coronavirus diagnosis has completely upended Trump's re-election campaign. All of his scheduled events will either be postponed or held virtually. It's a stark change for Trump, who has maintained a busy travel schedule crisscrossing the country despite the pandemic. And that's part of the reason why the contact tracing process, which is now underway with many of the nation's top leaders, elected officials, and their staffs, is so massive in scale. Here's the president's travel for just the past week, which former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb told CNBC is when Trump was likely most contagious. Last Saturday, Trump spoke at the ceremony where he nominated Judge Amy Coney Barrett for the Supreme Court. He also conducted a campaign rally in Pennsylvania. Then on Sunday, Trump held a reception for Gold Star military families. On Monday, Trump was part of a photo op with Lordstown Motors back in D.C. and had a COVID testing press conference. On Tuesday, Trump traveled to Ohio for the first presidential debate with Joe Biden. Wednesday, he held a fundraiser in Minnesota and then another rally in the same state. And then yesterday, Trump was in New Jersey for a roundtable and then fundraiser at his Bedminster Golf Club. CNBC.com's Brian Schwartz is now reporting that many of the 50 or so Republican donors who paid to spend the evening with President Trump at that New Jersey fundraiser are now, quote, freaking out.
President Donald Trump attended a fundraiser on Thursday right before he announced that he was positive for the coronavirus. Effectively what it was at an event at his Bedminster golf course, but it was 30 to 50 people, we were told, who were within that range at Bedminster on Thursday, just before he announced he had the coronavirus. So this caused a lot of fear within the donor ranks of those who met him and met people who spoke with him. People who were familiar with the event the next morning were fielding calls and text messages from Republican donors who attended this event. Many of them were panicking and, we were told, freaking out because, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't know if the RNC and the Trump campaign could give them an extra read as to where the president was in terms of his health with the coronavirus and what they should do next. So there was a bit of a panic this morning, and I would argue probably going into today, about what their next steps are. You have to understand, they didn't know going into this event that the president may have had the coronavirus at that point, or at least seems to have likely had it at that point. This was an event that cost up to $250,000 a head. It's very expensive. It clearly raised a lot of money for the president. And it's interesting that there are a lot of questions surrounding whether the White House knew that the president's advisor, Hope Hicks, had this before Trump went to this event in New Jersey on Thursday. Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey is being very clear. If you even suspect that you have the coronavirus after being around the president in this case, stay home, get tested, and go from there. As effectively as this, contact your doctor. I would say, even if you're not living in that state, if you're from the surrounding area, you should be following his guidelines at this point, because the president has said he is positive with this. Maybe they're mild symptoms in the beginning, but I know many people who have had this who had mild symptoms in the beginning, and 2 weeks later it was a nightmare. So I would say, people should be following what Governor Murphy is pushing right now.
The White House has been routinely testing President Trump's visitors during the pandemic. But the tests that they've been using may have played into how we got here, with the president, first lady, and a senior advisor, all now infected with the virus. CNBC's Meg Tirrell has the details of the White House's testing program.
So we know that the White House has used an Abbott test called ID Now, which takes about 15 minutes to return results right there on location. And we heard from Corey Lewandowski this morning on the Today Show that they still use that test.
When you go to the White House, you receive the Abbott lab. It's a 15-minute test, and they notify you if you test positive. So when I was at the White House on Saturday, I was notified that I did not have COVID-19. Again, on Wednesday, when I was with the president, I was tested immediately before seeing him. It took about 30 minutes. It was probably the Abbott lab test again, and I was notified that I was negative for that.
Now, the reason this is particularly interesting is as far back as May, there were signs that there could be issues with that test, potentially returning false negatives. And experts tell me the testing technology behind that test really isn't suitable for asymptomatic screening and really is better for potentially using them in the doctor's office where people have symptoms. And that negative test results really should be confirmed with a stronger, more sensitive test. Now, Abbott, for its part, says that its test has been used for more than 11 million Americans. It doesn't know which test was used for the president and the first lady, but does note that their test is shown to be more than 95% sensitive when used 7 days after people get symptoms. Now, there are other tests known as PCR tests, and those are really the gold standard for being the most sensitive, for really being able to pick up virus, sometimes even being criticized for being too sensitive because it can pick up viral fragments even after somebody's recovered. That is what you get if you get one of those nasal swabs and it's sent away to a lab. It can take longer to come back because it does have to get sent to a lab to be processed. And then you get your results a day to 7 days to sometimes, in the worst case scenarios, even longer than that later. We don't know exactly what the White House's testing protocols are, except that they use this Abbott test and it takes 15 minutes. They could use other tests as confirmation, but certainly the appeal of a test like that is it only takes 15 minutes to get the result. And so if you're using it to screen people to get into an event, you can do it right away, whereas other tests do require time to come back, and then somebody would need to quarantine in that time frame to make sure that their status doesn't change since the time that they gave the sample for the test. The problem is that those rapid tests don't catch every infection, and so using it for asymptomatic screening for people going to the White House and interacting with the president can be problematic.
Okay, time for our sound check. The news that President Trump tested positive for COVID-19 has broad implications for his health, that of his closest aides, as well as the upcoming election, Capitol Hill priorities, and of course, the financial markets. Experts in each of these areas were on CNBC's airwaves all day digesting the headlines. Here's what they had to say.
The president does have mild symptoms, and as we look to try to make sure that not only his health and safety and welfare is good, we continue to look at that for all of the American people.
With the president getting it, I think it really brings home that this is for real, it isn't going away, and that maybe we can get jumpstart the stimulus that seems to have been bogged down, because I think the general feeling among people in the financial community is that we need one more bite at the apple.
Well, I think the most important issue is the course of the virus determines the course of the economy. We know behavior is the dominant factor that forces people to pull back, particularly baby boomers who are older and at higher risk of contagion and the worst consequences of the virus. They pull back when risks of contagion go up and the number of cases go up. That's occurred time and time again, regardless of what's happened with regard to lockdowns.
This is just causing is much more uncertainty into a market that was already facing uncertainty, whether it came to the fiscal stimulus and elections. So you throw this on top of it, and the market was already in a fragile state, and our economy's in a fragile state.
So I think that what we ultimately see is Is that the stimulus marches on? Is that the Supreme Court nomination marches on? Is that the market marches on? That the economy marches on? And that life marches on in general?
Okay, let's get to our numbers round. First up, 661,000. We learned from this morning's jobs report that the U.S. economy added 661,000 jobs in September. Now, that's a lot, but it's way less than the 800,000 that economists were looking for. It's just the latest sign that the economic recovery from the coronavirus pandemic may be stalling out. Roughly 10 million of the 22 million people who lost their jobs as a result of the shutdowns remain unemployed. The disappointing jobs report caps off a week filled with announcements of corporate job cuts, including 28,000 layoffs at Disney, 32,000 furloughs combined at American and United Airlines, and 3,800 cuts at insurer Allstate. Next, 19,000. Amazon said yesterday that more than 19,000 of its employees contracted COVID-19 this year. 19,000! That's about 1.4% of Amazon's total workforce. This information comes after months of pressure on the e-commerce giant from labor groups and regulators to disclose how many of its people became infected. Early on in the pandemic, warehouse workers raised concerns that Amazon wasn't doing enough to protect its employees from getting sick. We should note this 19,000 number does not include contractors or third-party delivery drivers. And finally, 139,300. Tesla announced this morning that it delivered 139,300 vehicles in the third quarter, topping analyst estimates of around 137,000. Now, this deliveries number is the closest thing to car sales that Tesla discloses. But keep in mind, in the beginning of the year, CEO Elon Musk said that Tesla expected to deliver at least 500,000 vehicles in 2020. The company never said that would change, but in its official financial filings, Tesla stopped saying it would, quote, comfortably exceed that number. That's it for After Hours, but before we go, here's one thing to watch next week. There's another debate coming up. Vice President Mike Pence and Senator Kamala Harris are scheduled to face off on Tuesday. Now, as of now, the matchup is still on the books, and both Pence and Harris have tested negative for COVID-19 as of today. Be sure to catch all our coverage of the debate and the 2020 election by going to CNBC.com and downloading the CNBC app. We'll be back here in our home office on Tuesday and Thursday of next week with new editions of After Hours, so be sure to catch us then.